Queensland, where they want to take a new step in trying to protect people who are victims of domestic violence by making a thing called coercive control illegal. Now, we'll have a conversation about what coercive control is in a second, but it is something that, you know, all good intentions we're all kind of going to agree with, but is somebody going to misinterpret this? Wait and see. Here's the Premier talking about why this is where she wants to go.
Coercive control can take many forms. It can take the form of a person that has their finances controlled, are told what to wear, are told where they can and can't go. It is a really severe form of oppression that can last months, if not years.
So, Jenna, I would assume that under this piece of legislation, telling somebody to wear something for religious reasons would be considered coercive control and therefore illegal? Or we can all understand the situations this is built for, which is when a woman doesn't have a job, the partner's the one with the income and he is riding the finances like a hawk, or vice versa if it's male-female, right? It's a task force. It ain't a law yet. What do you think?
I think it's interesting. I think this specific legislation should be months, if not years off, because I think it's such a murky issue, and I really applaud the fact that the New South Wales government have decided to embark on a bit of a task force to understand, you know, where the parameters would lie and where the points of reference would be when it comes to drafting up specific acts and things like that around it. So I understand where Premier Palaszczuk may be coming from, because I know that they've had some pretty heavy lobbying over there following that probably the most horrific case of domestic violence we've seen in Australian history, being the Hannah Clarke murder last year. And I can understand that she probably wants to get moving on it, but I think you cannot rush something like this. You have to buy in from a lot of groups from within the community, specifically minorities and also from different cultural backgrounds and things like that, because I think it would be just like the legislation where you had to ban gay conversion therapy in Victoria. You don't want to have an all-encompassing piece of legislation with itty-bitty pieces put in, because that can be very, very dangerous for everyone involved.
Well, I'll give you the tip. If there is nasty itty-bitty pieces, they will put it in under the omnibus of, the Protecting Partners Act of 2021, and therefore you're anti-protecting partners. Because, look, the granular stuff here, again, for those that are going to half listen and dob to somebody more popular on Twitter, none of us here want a system that makes it any easier to abuse somebody, and anyone who does is a prick. All right? We are all in absolute unison about the dog act that is trying to control someone like this. The conversations that I've had about coercive control and how it gets defined and whom defines it, there is a common sense version and there is an activist version. I don't want the activist version to become the law of the land, James.
That's right. And I mean, Jenna mentioned the New South Wales. And in New South Wales, the task force has already been accused of taking a very feminist and anti-family line on a lot of these things. And, the fact is, this is one of those things where terrible cases make really bad law. You've got a horrible case, and so you want to stop it, and you want to prevent it. And then you wind up with this huge piece of legislation that's going to potentially criminalize a lot of innocent things in the first instance. I mean, if my wife controls all the money in the house, which she does, and that's fine, because I'm happy for somebody else to do it, that's not control. If I say, oh, can I get a leave pass to go out with the boys tonight to the pub? That's not coercive control. That's just the way people work. And, I worry that you get this, and then in sort of like family law disputes, that you wind up taking things that might have been innocent behaviors and turning them into things in a family law dispute, all sorts of other unintended consequences, although I think for some of the activists and that group, I think they're actually quite intended consequences.
They see a world of Trojan horses inside, imagine a babushka doll of Trojan horses. That could be what might be happening here. But Joe, also, the other thing worth talking about too is that, again, we don't know where the limits are on all of this, right? Yep. But if it's for all citizens, then even potentially grounding somebody from a week as a parent, that would be literally, depriving them of a certain level of liberty. So, again, the granular is where the debate's going to be. All of us are going to be in absolute unison about not wanting anything that makes it easier for abusers. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it sort of takes me back, and I'm not in any way trying to make a light of this, but it takes me back to the old axiom that you can't legislate against stupidity, i.e. you make a law so broad that it has a sort of catch-all effect, and you end up catching things you don't want to catch. You end up absorbing people's freedoms, and then if you make it too granular and too specific, you end up getting into a sort of ridiculous sort of maze or rabbit warren that dives right into people's lives. This is why I don't like laws that dictate who people can and can't have sex with, or who they can and can't marry, or what they should or shouldn't have to say in the bedroom before they can have sex that's deemed by the government to be consensual. All these things I find really, really creepy. And I'll give you a few examples. One is obviously the parent who grounds their wayward teenager. Is that then a form of coercive control? In a toxic relationship, often in domestic violence relationships, there's obviously been some kind of breakdown and dysfunction. It can often be very, very uneven, and often, far more often, it is the woman who is grotesquely disadvantaged. But it can also be, go both ways. Now, what if, for example, there are substance abuse issues in that relationship? What if the woman tells the guy that he's not allowed to go out and spend that paycheck on booze, or he's not allowed to go and plunge it into the pokies? Now, could he then say, well, that is coercive control. You are trying to deny me money if you're taking away my credit card or debit card to stop me from spending it. Could he then turn that around to the woman? Because presumably these laws are going to be gender blind. And if he is a malevolent force in the relationship, he may still be able to use that law. And if you think that that's beyond the pale, we already have a nationwide template for coercive control of finances. It's called the cashless welfare card, in which the government, the providers of welfare, which is a word that is meant to mean what it says it does, says that no, you can't spend things on this, or that. Now, if one party in a relationship was to say the same thing to another party in a relationship, how would you then decide whether that was coercive control? Would it there have to be, would it then end up going before a court? And then would, how many cases do you think there would be in a relationship where you already have, and we've seen examples of people making these sorts of claims. There was quite a high-profile case of an actor in which this claim was seen to be completely unfounded. Would we see, and that went all the way to court. That required a magistrate to actually make a finding on that. Now, if you had this sort of arsenal there, how would it be? And of course, and again, no one wants any coercive control in a relationship. I remember the last sleep out I did with Vinny's, there was an incredibly powerful story of a woman who was subjected to horrible control by her husband. But it was far more complex than that as well, because as a part of that control, she was broken and rightly very, very distraught and upset, but she turned to drink. And so the husband was then angry at her for spending money on the drink. And so you get to the point, well, all right, is that a problem if a husband's saying, well, no, you can't go and drive the car to pick up the kids while you're drunk, or you can't drive the car when you're drunk, full stop? Is that coercive control? Or if you take away the money and say, you're not allowed to leave the house because I know you're just going to go and buy booze. Now, in the case, the woman I met and the story she told, even from her perspective, the husband was a horrible person and was coercive and controlling. But if he, for example, is saying, well, no, you can't get in that car if you're going to take our kids because you're drunk.
Yeah.
Who then, even though she is clearly the victim of terrible abuse, if he is making that decision on her behalf, what does the law say? And this is what I mean when I say you can't legislate against every single tiny little bad decision that people make, because once you get right down into that, who decides? And of course, by the time it gets to a court, well, either she's gotten in the car or she hasn't, or the husband's hurt her again or he hasn't.